Alright, today I'm going to talk about stimulus, the purpose behind stimulus, and why it usually doesn't work. After my last audio on TARP, there were some people who criticized me saying that I was sounding too much as if I was reading, quote, a term paper. So I'm going to try to do this off the cuff. But this also means that I'm going to occasionally stumble on words. I'm just warning you. Anyway, why do governments try to stimulate the economy? First of all, this is usually made in times of crisis and in times of panic. And this is because of something called the velocity of money. That means how fast money moves from one consumer or from one company to another. This is also called propensity to consume, which could be high or low depending on the times. If you were to get another $1, how much would you spend? 90 cents perhaps? Well, in that case, your propensity to consume is 90%. It means you would consume 90% of each additional dollar. Now, in times of crisis, people tend to save, and so the propensity to consume falls. And this has sort of a domino effect, because when people spend less, that means the shops can sell less, the factories can produce less, people get unemployed, people see that others get unemployed, they get scared, they start to save even more because they fear they might get unemployed, and that is what causes their ultimate unemployment. So here is where the government steps in. Because even though ultimately, this is what the stimulus supporters argue, even though ultimately the trend might be reversed naturally, if the government would step in, this would happen a lot faster. Because when the government does a stimulus, it is trying to compensate for the fact that people are spending less. The government spends because you want. And to do that, they have to, one way or the other, take the money out of your pocket forcefully to and essentially force you to spend. So this is also in order to create inflation, because inflation causes consumers to spend. If you expect prices to get higher tomorrow than they are today, chances are you will shop today, not tomorrow. So the problem, of course, is that first of all, the government can't spend just like that. I mean, what would they spend on? The politicians will have to decide that. And that means that whatever is spent on will be spent on not because the economy needs it, but simply because the politicians need it. And so you could expect a lot of stimulus in states that are important or states that have important senators or congressmen, while you could expect less spending in states where the president does not expect to ever be able to win in the next election. And that is simply inefficient use of money. So, and also you need to find something to spend on. I mean, the Keynesians, who are the supporters of the stimulus, the Keynesians like to treat the government as if it could simply infuse $300 billion into the economy just like that, just by snatching the fingers. But that's not so. They need to find something to buy. They need to find a seller. They need to they need to get the economy. They need to get money out in the economy, and that usually takes some time. Often so long time that it would have been quicker to just let the market recover. Second of all, the government usually does not run surpluses during the good years. Actually, in the Keynesian and leftist economists' defense, you have to say that they usually recommend that governments run surpluses during the good years so that they can stimulate the economy during the bad years, but they usually don't. And this means that the government has to borrow money to stimulate the economy. And this means that the government will have to pay back this money with interest at a later point, which will ultimately lead to less spending. I mean, think about it. If they borrow 1 trillion and they have to pay, let's say, all in all compounded 25% interest on that, that means that will be 250 billion less money in the economy at some point in the future. So So that's the next point. Spending actually decreases in the long run. And furthermore, you have the insecurity caused by government intervention, and this is often underestimated. Usually, the market can be really tough during the recessions, of course. Companies get cleansed out. But it's normally it's over really quick. I mean, in the last audio on TARP, I mentioned the depression of 1920, where unemployment tripled, but then within a year or so returned to its normal level. But with stimulus, you don't know which companies is going to survive. You don't know, because the government may decide to help a company that would normally go into bankruptcy, like GM, for instance. And this makes both companies unsure about the future, and it also makes the competitors to these walking dead companies unsure. Normally, if um, if Toyota knows that GM is going into bankruptcy, and they could know that quite early, um, they will start to hire people because they expect the demand for their cars to go up. But if they don't know whether GM is really going into bankruptcy or whether the government will save them at the last minute, they won't hire until they're 100% sure that GM is bankrupt and is shutting down. And that takes, of course, a lot longer time. So, and fourth, you may wonder, how is this evil circle that I talked about in the beginning, how is that gonna be broken anyway? You see, the thing is that the reason why consumers suddenly start to save more is usually a good reason. In the case of 2007, 2008, people started to save more because they were indebted, they had to pay back their debts. And that's a good thing. And the government should not intervene to stop them from doing that. It should not encourage them to borrow more or do decisions that are financially unsound. That's just senseless. No, the government could intervene in a recession like the one in the early 90s. Because in the early 90s, you had a recession that was caused mostly by falling consumer confidence. People expected the oil price to triple or even quadruple like they had done in the 70s. That was during the Gulf War, because people remember that when things are a little shaky in the Middle East, the oil price tends to go north. They remember that. Of course, those fears were mostly unfounded. And um, but the problem is that the government doesn't have to stimulate the economy even then, because sooner or later people discover by themselves that they didn't have to save. That the thing they feared didn't happen. So, and consumers are usually better at and make smarter decisions than the government does for them. So, and this stimulus program that the Obama has done is the main reason why unemployment has not fallen back, because you don't know if you can hire, you don't know who your competitors will be in 5 years, you don't know how much you will sell, because you don't know whether the government will buy from you or from someone else. You don't know. And hiring someone, like I said last time, hiring someone is a long-term decision. You need to know not just do you need staff today, but will you need it in 5 years or 10 years or 15 years even. You should have a pretty good idea about where the market is heading. So those are the main reasons why stimulus does not work and is not needed, even though on paper it looks just fine. Anyway, thank you for listening.